Hello, my name is Michael O'Keefe, aka The Movie Wizard. If you enjoy this interview and want to hear more top-notch film industry conversations, please press the thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell to stay in the know. Nurse Sherri exists in a subgenre of a subgenre. The subgenre is a rip-off movie of The Exorcist, for which there are plenty of examples, such as the Blaxploitation one, Abby, the Canadian one, Kathy's Curse, or one of the Italian ones like Beyond the Door. However, there's a subgenre within this subgenre, which is a ripoff of The Exorcist, but done porno style. No, I am not joking around about this. The other porn Exorcist ripoff, or riff, is done by hilariously sleazy auteur of the films Burial Ground and Surf Nude for Your Killer. His name is Andrea Bianchi, and his movie is called Malabimba. Al Adamson managed to make a worse movie within this genre than Andrea Bianchi, making his maybe the worst, but I really don't want to know or go any further in this filthy trend. One could tell Al Adamson could not give two shits about Nurse Sherri, and neither should you, and that is all I have to say about this movie. Draculas Castle is a TV edit of Blood of Dracula's Castle, which adds in some werewolf stuff, but is 95% the same movie as before. Now you know. Oh, perhaps you are wondering, is the werewolf material cool, add dimension, or is memorable? No, it is not. Now you know. Blood of Dracula's Castle is like an even schlockier attempt at classic Universal horror than Dracula vs. Frankenstein because of the castle setting and environment that was calculated from the beginning of the production, not the end. Al Adamson didn't get horror movies, they weren't his thing. But his favorite were the old Universal horror movies that used Boris Karloff, Lon Chaney Jr., as well as Bela Lugosi. But in Dracula vs. Frankenstein, that material was added on in reshoots. To see Al Adamson make a more conscious effort of doing that classy old world sort of horror movie is painful because the actors clearly don't take the material seriously because there isn't much to work with. Al Adamson could make bad movies fun to then be generously interpreted as good movies, but you would have to really stretch that for Blood for Dracula's Castle. Lost, not to be confused with J.J. Abrams' Labyrinth of a TV show, is another Al Adamson kids movie under the Seven Kids label along with Carnival Magic, but this one lacked the dynamic energy to make it totally worthwhile. It tells the story of a woman who moves in with another man in the countryside and the dysfunctional relationship between her daughter and the new man friend. She's used to the city life, and he's incapable of offering her that lifestyle again. You're going to understand where both of them are coming from, but it's like one of those arguments where both people never change their mind or tone and circle back to the same point over and over again. Eventually the little girl runs away with her dog, and you guessed it, they get lost. Ah, yes, the title is earned, and there is a lot of roaming around endlessly, both from her side and the new daddy who is trying to rescue her. School's Out at Sunset Cove is an Al Adamson youth comedy, so the cast is not predominantly rogues or degenerates, which is a little strange to see if you know Al Adamson movies. There's sort of a clean and fun-spirited thing going on in this movie. It also has a shitty script and is lifeless at times. It is like a sad clown being forced to smile by the other clowns for some cynical reason. Basically, a bunch of teeny boppers are trying to stop baddie developers from having their way with the beach they go to from time to time, but it's perhaps more emblematic of their clean spirits. Spoiler alert, they do a bit of this and a bit of that with the beach protests, the guiding plot of the movie. They spend a bunch of time protesting there. At the end, they stop the stupid and mean developers, and then the movie is over. The Female Bunch is a 70s woman's lib movie with no insight, plenty of smut, and some decent action. Unlike in Dracula vs. Frankenstein, Lon Chaney talks in this movie and is quite a sound to hear, as he was at an advanced stage of throat cancer. It sounds like he could die at any second. He's a presence in Dracula vs. Frankenstein, but a great part of the rural environment in this one, as he is a crazy old fat ass, so a necessary thing in a movie like this where you're not supposed to like men. The women are all fine in this movie, but they are only working with what they've got, which isn't a hell of a lot. The Vegas flashback is nice and all, but there isn't much character development or a plot to be seen in this one. It's just a bunch of ladies on a farm who have their own difficult past, and they beat up all the men that arrive. I did enjoy Russ Tamblyn in a thankless role as a guy who gets humiliated by the female bunch, and believe he is the greatest stock actor Al Adamson ever had. The Fiend with an Electronic Brain is a weaker edit of Psycho Go-Go, which was entertaining to me because the killer was motivated by sexual perversion. The man spent too much time in go-go bars. In this version, his motivation is less interesting. John Carradine is a mad scientist who experimented on his brain, so it goes from psychosexual to some half-assed Frankenstein of sorts knockoff. That may or may not be a cop-out, but it is not as interesting for this film critic because it removes a human element and just throws in some made-up science as an explanation instead of really going for the wild emotional roller coaster of humanity. John Carradine is not even really demented or compelling as a mad scientist, so this edit exists to pander, which much of marketing does, but it wasn't pandering to my kind of taste. That is most certainly sure. Blood of Ghastly Horror is the ultimate re-edit of Psycho Go-Go, far surpassing the Fiend with the electronic brain. While the descriptive part of my first sentence is true, the emphasis is fake. The movie is a little bit better, but follows a storyline that is still a total cop-out. The freaky sex fiend stuff will always entertain me more in a 60s schmaltz horror movie than science that makes no sense and that is a mimic of universal horror. A man is getting it on with a nurse, then one of her co-workers comes in to sneak a peek or join. This is how Nurses for Sale opens, which is a solid smutty opening to hook in an audience for just over an hour of an enjoyable romp into the known senses of degeneracy in a plot that will not blow your mind. If it seems like the plot jumps around and is a little incomprehensible, that is not the reason you may or may not be insane. It is because Al Adamson was hired to shoot extra scenes to an abandoned German movie that had 30 minutes shot. I'm not sure if they cared at the drive-in, but you might just expect some breezy sleaze that entertained you for a bit, just over an hour, that consists of a useless German movie that had some nurse scenes shot to make it seem like a Roger Corman movie. The movie is kind of sexy, a little fun, and totally dumb. Blazing Stewardesses is the Blazing Saddles riff sequel to the Naughty Stewardesses, which is not as sexy or fun as the Naughty Stewardesses, but it is not a bad time at the movies. It is a Western comedy with some sexiness, but is ultimately too silly of an affair to be a worthy follow-up to the Naughty Stewardesses to bring a third sexy, stupid Stewardesses movie to life. Some of the new Stewardesses are a little too lame and vapid to properly work with this material, and the jokes are usually not funny at all, but add to a silly tone that is fun in a not laugh out loud sort of way. The ambiance can only last for so long until you eventually want this dumb yet fun movie to end, so it may not be the worst thing ever filmed, but it is disappointing. Although expecting a trilogy out of this material is also insane. Girls for Rent is a good time, not a great time, where female assassins seem to revisit a gas station a few too many times, but has some solid cruelty in action that makes it worth watching for fans of 70s exploitation. There is a setup as to why the female protagonist is on the run, but too much of this movie is her trying to get away and cutting back and forth to the killers, learning where she is and where to go next. It is lame exposition and a bad script, but the attitude is there. And it is an edgy action movie. It is just an undistinguished one. I did enjoy one character who fights topless and humiliates someone through giving him sex she believes he is unworthy of, only to kill him, then kill his dad as soon as he hears the gunshots. That is pure sadism. You need standout visuals like that in any movie, especially one with such gaping structural flaws. Samuel Sherman not only worked for independent international pictures when he produced most of Al Adamson's movies, he also worked for a company called Hemisphere Pictures, which produced mainly horror movies from the Philippines. Most famously from Hemisphere was the Blood Island collection. So there were 3 horror movies with the word blood in their title in a reference to Herschel Gordon Lewis's Blood Feast. One day, Hemisphere was in need of a product very quickly because of contractual issues, so Sam Sherman enlisted Al Adamson to make Brain of Blood in the US, which was there entirely to replicate a Blood Island movie, making the circle complete. Blood Feast morphed into the Blood Island, which morphs back into the US in the form of Brain of Blood, a movie that's very rushed but fun to laugh at. What a great Sam Sherman story. While Death Dimension is the other Al Adamson movie starring Jim Kelly along with Black Samurai, I personally prefer the latter because it seems more organically a story and less of a Sam Sherman marketing ploy. Death Dimension is going for the blaxploitation market, but in the late 70s, that wasn't enough. There had to be a blaxploitation meets another genre mixture going on. In fact, Jim Kelly was the blaxploitation meets kung fu actor. Having been in Enter the Dragon and acting movies like Black Belt Jones, he is practically synonymous with the blaxploitation meets kung fu trends, where actually both genres were fading away for the public. Death Dimension fancies itself a blaxploitation meets James Bond movie through the marketing, since an actual James Bond was in the movie, Mr. George Lazenby himself. While James Bond has not left the public cinematic fixation, Death Dimension certainly has. It's a fun idea of merging two things together, and a good way to get people in the theater, but then they see the movie, it comes out, you get the money, Bye-bye. Reminiscent of Planet of the Vampires by maestro director Mario Bava, Horror of the Blood Monsters is an interesting bullshit sci-fi movie looking at alien vampires shot primarily in the Philippines and a little bit in America. Producer Sam Sherman had a relationship with the Philippines, so they shot most of the movie over there, but Al Adamson added some out-in-space scenes as well as a little bit of action in the States to break things up. Like The Blood Drinkers, a lot of this movie is shot through a color filter that is like black and white, that is hyped up in the opening credits, but looks really cheap. But it's totally fun for a schlocky movie. Despite Al coming in to shoot extra stuff to make this Bava spoof a little bit better, the movie is almost too weird to relate with, but it's still an interesting piece of garbage that may or may not get your attention for some of its duration. The Fakers is a weird sort of James Bond knockoff. It is about an FBI agent who goes undercover as a Las Vegas criminal to uncover a neo-Nazi plot in a script that is convoluted and stupid. But is it fun? Yeah, it's pretty fun. There are pretty ladies with dubious loyalties to the protagonist named Mark Adams, as well as to the side of the law they find themselves on. It is hard to believe that there would be a real credible neo-Nazi threat in the States during the 60s, and not just a bunch of unorganized yahoos tossing out racial slurs. But oh well, that is what this movie decides on as a nemesis or antagonist. They even talk about the role of communists. I mean, wow, they're jamming a lot of ideas in there. But I digress. The action is kind of fun, and a real movie is there to be seen despite the script being really thin. Al Adamson's scripts fitted into marketing campaigns, but they might have been better served to make each movie as good as possible, instead of jamming in a bunch of ludicrous concepts together to then expect a good word of mouth. But then again, what do I know? Those movies came and went and made the dollars. Hell's Bloody Devils is a recut version of The Fakers, including biker gangs into the James Bond-esque storyline of thwarting American neo-Nazis. The idea is that because neo-Nazi bikers, why not cash in on two genres? As cynically calculated as that sounds, Sam Sherman's idea turned out to be true, and Hell's Bloody Devils is better than the original reincarnation of the story of The Fakers. And if you want to think about this, this should be no surprise. Al Adamson could never do a convincing James Bond ripoff. He had neither the brains or the money to do so, but a half-assed one with bikers makes sense, and Satan's Sadists is perhaps his best movie. The movie feels more comfortable with itself since they're doing the biker movie, so you might as well do what you know instead of trying to do something you certainly can't. Psycho A Go-Go is a pretty standard crime movie that has scenes in a nightclub with lovely ladies dancing with their clothes on, but still gives a highly sexual charge to a mundane plot that adds to a psychotic element. The idea of having your psychology screwed up because of high doses of sexuality is sort of implied in this material and done visually, not in a preachy dialogue scene making as a positive for this story. It is also fun to see Al Adamson act in this movie, even if he isn't anything too special as a performer. Strip that and the psychosexual element, and you're left with a pretty whatever crime movie about beefs that no audience member will likely care about after the movie. The movie is still playful in its perversity, and even though it's pumped out with little thought, believe me, that is evidence. It is a fun movie to watch while being totally undistinguishable from other 60s trash movies. Mean Mother was originally another movie shot by Spanish director Leon Klimovsky. Then Al Adamson came in to shoot some more stuff to create a not entirely different movie, but a war movie with blaxploitation stuff added. Klimovsky should be noted for having another movie of his released on Blu-ray in 2020, which is a Spanish giallo called Trauma, put out in Vinegar Syndrome's Forgotten Gialli Volume 1 box set. Anyways, Klimovsky seemed to have shot a Vietnam movie that was either unfinished or just unmarketable, so Sam Sherman enlisted Al Adamson to give it their blaxploitation twist by adding a black actor into the Vietnam action. Then there's the back home stuff where crime goes down. The movie is pretty forgettable, but fun. While not a riot or anything, it will pass the time, and blaxploitation completists will have to add this one to the list as well. Black Heat is another blaxploitation romp for Al Adamson, who did kind of solid for the middle of the road tier blaxploitation movies, but if you like this genre or are a completist, you need to see it. Producer Sam Sherman claims that he and Al Adamson actually did not want to simply cash in on the trend of blaxploitation. They actually wanted to work with black actors, and by all accounts, black actors got along just fine with them. Regardless of everyone's feelings on the optics, the story is about lower-end gangsters trying to make a deal with the Central American gangsters, and there's a little side pimping to pay off a gambling debt. Typical of Sherman and Adamson scripts, lots of stuff in there without a solid focus on storytelling, but the vibes of this one are pretty good. Or not bad. Just depends on how generous you are that day with this material as a viewer. Reminiscent of She-Devils on Wheels and even Switchblade Sisters, this movie called Angel's Wild Woman is also the final biker movie by Al Adamson, the creator of Satan's Sadists. While not as good as Satan's Sadists, the girl power scene in Angel's Wild Woman is not a bad diversion for Al Adamson, which is perhaps on par with Herschel Gordon-Lewis's She-Devils on Wheels, but a notch or two below Dracula's Switchblade Sisters. Like Switchblade Sisters, Angel's Wild Woman is all about the girls starting their own gang, having lost any use of the men that they were ganged up with originally, and it is also always funny to me when men get upset when women are abusive to men in movies. They cry hypocrisy when they never felt anything about seeing it the other way around. And I also truly believe that Al Adamson was best suited for the biker genre, even though that was not quite a trend by 1972. What was zeitgeist in 1969 was essentially out the door in 1972, but this movie is still pretty solid angry girl fare for a genre that is as dirty and unrefined as Al Adamson's cinematic gaze to begin with. Five Bloody Graves is a neat Al Adamson western which follows a guy who is skilled with a gun but is emotionally crippled since the death of his wife a year before. Many women want him, but he is emotionally unavailable for them. If he makes love to them, he does not make emotional space for them afterwards. His mind is wandering back to his dead wife. That setup is intriguing for a low-budget western, which came out in 1969, the same year as The Wild Bunch. Interestingly, since they are both emotionally fatal movies, but of course, Five Bloody Graves lacks the same visual inspiration and budget. John Carradine plays an interesting preacher-type character who reminds me of Klaus Kinski in A Bullet for the General. However, Carradine's character is a little bit more layered and interesting, believe it or not. While this movie is not written about as a great western, and that is fair, it does have more going on than most low-budget ones. Halfway to Hell is a 1960 western movie that was produced by Al Adamson and directed by Al's dad, Victor Adamson, aka Denver Dixon, who specialized in making westerns simply because they were his favorite kind of movies. The movie is reminiscent of the stiff and dull John Wayne movies from the 1930s, like Texas Terror, and is not stylistically thrilling as the spaghetti western that would come out from the Italians 4 years later. While it may not be totally thrilling from a visual point of view, the gruff manner of the acting gives it some realness, and the blunt sexuality may not be sensual, but is sort of accurate, especially for the time and place it is set in. The leader of the Mexican gang wants a woman, but she loves the boyish lowling, so the leader engages that man in a duel of whips so that he can have the woman in a transactional, not really romantic kind of way. The movie combines the uninspired visual panache of Texas Terror with the boiling sexuality of King Vidor's western Duel in the Sun. And what other movie can say that? Dracula vs. Frankenstein almost was not going to feature the horror icons and be something entirely different until Sam Sherman realized the bare bones movie from before was not going to cut it. Since both characters were in public domain, it worked out quite well for them, as this movie might have been forgotten about instead of its cult status. It has to be the most memorable Al Adamson horror movie because of all the interesting character actors featured in it, and promising something iconic in the title, just to be a Herschel Gordon-Lewis-esque small sheet gore affair is a unique place to be. It's perhaps the worst Dracula I've ever seen, but because he's so lame, he's also one of the best Draculas I've ever seen, just for the wrong reasons. And having Lon Chaney Jr. as well as a mention from the 20s horror movie Freaks is a nice touch. The movie's a lot of fun, and your scoffs turn into laughs on repeated viewings. I imagine that making Black Samurai must have been a buzzkill for Jim Kelly. I mean, it's a fun movie, but it wasn't only a few years ago before he acted with John Saxon and Bruce Lee at End of the Dragon, which leads me to believe that he had bad representation to end up with Al Adamson, or perhaps all blaxploitation actors faced the wrath from white America at that time. Black Samurai is another James Bond-style mission for the somewhat lifeless actor Jim Kelly, but he has a jetpack scene, walks around with sexy ladies, and beats up everyone effortlessly. The ending even has Jim scrapping with an eagle, which looks like the animal was treated properly, but it is drawn out and kind of pointless, but it is effective because it is so psychotronic in an Al Adamson fashion. Kung Fu / blaxploitation hybrid movie is best exemplified by Jim Kelly, and while I like the concept of the hybrid, he is a wooden actor, so maybe he deserved to make this movie that is certainly fun, but undeniably stupid. Jessi's girl is Lady Snowblood by the true way of the son of Denver Dixon. Yes, Al Adamson's dad has a stage name, and by all accounts was a strange man, since he had various cars parked around Los Angeles to avoid driving too far. Anyways, Denver Dixon loved Western movies, and this movie is sort of that stale generic looking Western for the 1970s, which is much as a standard Western as it is an anti-Western somehow. This time period has spaghetti Westerns, acid Westerns, blaxploitation Westerns. Altman took a stab at it, so they were noted for their transgressive qualities, and in this movie you have the Lady Snowblood storyline in effect. A bunch of guys who did a horrific act of violence towards a woman and her husband have to die. It has the structure of an anti-Western, but it looks like a Western from a previous generation. It's a fun movie while being lame that I happen to enjoy a fair amount. Since Quentin Tarantino wrote a review for the Dynamite Brothers recently in his Tarantino Reviews blog on the New Bev site, one would think this would be a real standout in the set. QT even says in multiple points that he thinks Al Adamson is trash. So you would think that this movie, which is the Defiant Ones by the way of Rush Hour back in the 70s, would be kind of wonderful. Well, maybe that review was a little too glowing, or his criticisms of Al Adamson are a little too far-reaching, because it fits in the Al Adamson filmography perfectly well in my opinion. What does that mean? The movie is certainly fun at first when we are focusing on the lead black guy and lead Asian guy, but then other characters get lawn seeds and that exciting energy gets zapped. The dialogue sort of hangs in actors' mouths. It does not sound poetic or real. It sounds terrible, but hey, at least this movie has moments that are kind of awesome. Uncle Tom's Cabin is Al Adamson's best period movie, which might seem like a whatever statement to make, and it is, but it is also a very standard slave-exploitation movie from the same period known for Mandingo and Drum. While those two movies are better than this one, they are very good movies, so to see a movie that is similar to those, even the fact that you can have a conversation about it, is good stuff for me. Sure, Black Snake or Goodbye Uncle Tom are even more outrageous than Mandingo or Drum, making Al Adamson's effort undistinguished comparatively, but like all of Al's movies, they came and went, but they made money too. They really are not all that bad. It is just fun to be snarky with them because they are far from sacred cinematic cows, and any movie that has a harsh exploitation take on the antebellum South, made with some competency, is something I am very interested in seeing. These movies will make you rage against the slave masters, and when the cinematic mob justice happens, it is very satisfying. The use of real oppression is an incredibly effective way to entertain an audience. Carnival Magic is one of two kids' movies Al Adamson made in the 80s, and it is definitely the better one. And that's not even a faint praise. I think this movie is lots of fun, despite it not being technically wonderful. The fact is, this movie has heart. I like talking monkeys. It was a trend at the time. And it has the whole carnival setting, which is appropriate for a story that is mystical and freaky. How Al Adamson got away from boobs and blood to do a family movie that still feels sleazy because of the actors, the poor production value, and degenerate sounding monkey is mysterious, but it happened. Did Sam Sherman have anything to do with this movie? I don't think so. It really does have more heart because it can't rely on physical violence or sexuality. So while there is a sleazy undertone to it, the use of real emotion is sort of incredible for an Al Adamson movie, making it one of his better ones. The Naughty Stewardesses is a good time. Not a great script by any stretch, but entertaining smut that will make time pass and put a smile on your face with a story that is pretty much plotless drifting of an old guy who did some 1930s serial have sex with a young beautiful woman in the early 1970s. There's also a proto-Travis Bickle wannabe stud who emerges as a villain when, after being rejected by one of the girls, decides to kidnap 3 of them to get 50 grand from the old guy. This semi-tense twist comes very near the end of the movie, so it's not really a ticking bomb. There's nothing like that to be seen here. But hey, it's solid smut. Not quite on par with Russ Meyer, but I mean, I've seen dumber movies. This movie is all about the vibe and partying with the characters, which is all good and fun. So if you like good looking at women and aren't offended by a lack of storytelling in your movies, then you should be perfectly happy watching this movie. 70s sci-fi porn is a strange subgenre, but also one that perhaps should be celebrated for putting some of the weirdest images to celluloid I've seen. So I've seen one or two of these kind of movies before, but Cinderella 2000 by Al Adamson is the best take on this subgenre and is actually my favorite now. That's right, it is even preferred by me over Girl from Starship Venus, which is championed as the best of this subgenre, as it is mentioned by Quentin Tarantino as one of his all-time favorite films. This story looks at a future where sex is studied but not enjoyed. The people on Earth are like lab rats, constantly having sex in B-grade Star Trek costumes and sets until Cinderella 2000 is visited by a Michael York lookalike. Michael York, not really Michael York, but the lookalike says there is a thing called love, and maybe or maybe not will anyone on this dehumanized production find or deserve it. Brainwreck Show was a very trippy 2010 album with a cover of two bunnies getting it on in the woods, and I now will not believe that the shot was not lifted from this movie, which has a scene of the same thing. This is prime Al Adamson. The most interesting thing about Sadists is that there are scenes that were shot at the infamous Spawn Ranch, which had other things filmed there, but this was in 1969 when Charles Manson owned it. Al Adamson did have a working relationship with the cult leader for the production of this movie, so whatever else I say about it will be secondary in terms of intrigue. But that being said, it is actually a pretty solid movie. The biker gang wreak havoc on all of those that get in their way, but really anyone who's standing in the way are simply just around, but they had to pay some sort of cost despite not doing anything wrong. That bleakness and corrosive quality really works for this late 60s movie that could have easily been set in feudal Japan or the Old West. Yes, the story has that kind of timeless quality. It is a zeitgeist film from 1969, since it is the second-tier Easy Rider, essentially. The documentaries about directors are usually only reserved for directors of prestige, which makes sense because more of us respect them, and we want to hear about their respectable lives that led to respectable projects. However, auteurs of sleaze, or even just sleazy directors, have usually led pretty weird lives that are also worth pursuing, sometimes for a documentary production, and that is what we have with Blood and Flesh, the real life and ghastly death of Al Adamson. Al may not have been the most distinguished director, but he did make movies. His production of Satan's Sadists interacted with Charles Manson. He went on to believe in aliens and became one of those people. Then the story ends when he was murdered. Wow, that is fertile territory for a documentary. He lived a disturbed Californian life with lots of flair and made over 30 movies interacting with most certainly some of the strangest people in one of the strangest times.